Very good evening, folks. You're welcome along to another edition of the Irish F1 Show, once again in association with PFT Travel and Rapco, our kind sponsors throughout the course of the F1 World Championship this year. Thanks to everyone who's got in touch with us since the show last week. There's been a few nice comments after raining on social media over the last few days. And while we would love to be, I suppose, delving into an exciting review of the Mexico Grand Prix, it was rather substandard. So there will probably be a minimal enough amount of time spent talking about that, but there is a few hot and juicy topics that we can and will delve into about what's been going on maybe behind the scenes or what's going on maybe away from the track, which has caused an awful lot of debate over the last few days. And it's something that we would have, I suppose, touched on a little bit as well. Brian Rabbit is our first guest up this evening. How's things, Baz?
I'll go, Kev. Thank you. Back along today. Yeah, as you said, not the most thrilling of Grand Prix on the track, but plenty else to get our teeth into, I think.
Richard Carney is absent this evening, but jumping in is Liam Murray, the man I like to call Puncture. How are you getting on, sir?
Grand, yourself?
Not too bad. Listen, man, obviously we have a little WhatsApp group, and you contribute handsomely and regularly to that, and quite articulate as well, as much as I hate to give you credit. But we may give this lad a pop. So welcome along. Great to have you on board. You're keeping well.
Yeah, grand, thanks. Yeah, excited to be here. Happy to be here.
Good man. Well, listen, you look like a race engineer there anyway, which is a great help and a great start. Your first appearance here on the pod. But yeah, a lot of people are probably going to give us a bit of grief now later on, because they'll be saying, Jesus, the one time there's a hot and juicy topic and there's going to be big words, and Richie being very, very vocal on social media, and there's no Richie here tonight. Here's the first conspiracy theory of the evening out here, ladies and gents. But guys, look, as we said, it was up there with, was it the worst race of the year, Barry? It's definitely a contender.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's hard to remember the bad Grand Prix by their very nature, but I mean, yeah, it's only 2 days ago and it's pretty forgetful to start with. So yeah, not a whole lot went on from start to finish. But only thought that struck me only there since the Grand Prix was it's the first one in a while, I think anyway, that there hasn't been a whole host of grid penalties. Where people drop it further down the order after qualifying and stuff. And much as we sometimes, not myself generally, but a lot of people kind of give out about those grid penalties, they do help to spruce up the racing. So yeah, maybe that's not more than just a coincidence when, as I say, you put the fastest guy at the front and give him a head start, and then we're all shocked that no one passes each other. So maybe the grid penalties aren't too bad sometimes.
Yeah, I can't remember what lap it was, but obviously Ricciardo was a standout, and it was great to see him performing so well. But even just any sort of an instance of substance, when did Gasly run? What do you call him off the track? I can't think off the top of my head now. But it was about, am I right in saying it's about 40 laps in, lads?
Yeah, it was in their first stint, so it was, because it was when Ricciardo was doing his charge up through as well, because in the background you could see them overtaking, and then you could see Stroll and Gasly defending Stroll and actually driving into the side of him and wheel bashing him off. So it was fairly early on in the race.
Yeah, it was quite, and it was actually, I couldn't believe that he didn't give the position back himself straight away, nor was there any instruction from the team, because it was pretty slam dunk, exceeding track limits to gain a position. So that wasn't the biggest shock in the world to see that 5-second penalty being enforced. And he's not a man that can, he's 10 points on his license, and they're not starting to disappear until well into May. So he's on thin ice at the moment, is Pierre.
But Liam, he seems to be feeling pretty hard on by with all this. Like, has he a case?
I don't really think so. Like, he wasn't in control of his car when he was making the dive down and pushed him off. And I'd say he could feel hard done by for the points that he got for speeding under the red flag, because it was literally just when the red flag came out, and there's a bit of conspiracy going on behind the whole thing with Gasly as well, because he's been very vocal since the Japanese Grand Prix, and the FIA have kind of been focusing in on him quite a lot more since then, of which they kind of have been doing a little bit all year with people who are kind of outspoken about the FIA. But realistically, he's been outshone by Tsunoda all year so far. Like last year, he left Sonoda for dust, but this year Sonoda is putting in the better performances. He's further ahead in points, I think, as well. And Gasly just seems to be checked out, ready to go to Alpine for next year, and he's just driving on the edge and just doing whatever he kind of wants to get past it to go on further. Like,
Do you think Ricciardo's performance, Barry, and how good that was, is that just an expression of freedom with everything, or is there anything
I
other
think
than
it's
that behind it?
I think it's circumstance, to be honest. I mean, it's, as I always say, I always bring it back to basics. You know, when a guy is, all of a sudden, does better than he might have been doing, earlier in the race or earlier in the season or whatever else. You got to bring it back to basics. Guys driving down to a corner, there's a braking point. You brake at that point. It's actually racing a car is very controlled. It's very, it's not what some people think is, if you kind of just grab it by the balls and let's go, lads, like that doesn't turn into lap time, So it's not as if Ricciardo's just got some shot of adrenaline in his arm and just started driving faster. Like that's not how driving race cars work at any level, It's all about technique, and a lot of it's about kind of not holding back, but not overdriving the car. So, Ricciardo didn't all of a sudden just start to remember how to drive again, or start braking later or anything like that. I think it's a lot of the times it's a glass ceiling element to it. He's driving at his upper limit. The car had soft tires. It turned out they were the way to go, while everyone else was on, not everyone else, but a lot of those that he passed were on hard tires. So, obviously he still has to drive the car, but I would think it was more circumstance than all of a sudden Ricciardo just getting, just remembering how to drive a race car again. So, it was good. Don't get me wrong. It was a good result. He needed it. But I think a little bit disingenuous to say that it was, Ricciardo's back sort of thing.
Bit of banter between himself and Toto Wolff as well, Limo, after the race, and there's a lot of activity, I suppose, going on away from the track at the minute, and there's a couple of things to be nailed down in terms of seats in different places, which is obviously why we're kind of mentioning Ricciardo in a certain light here a little bit. But just talks of Hulkenberg in the mix, obviously possibly looking at it from a Haas point of view. Stoffel is going to be Mercedes reserve. No, he isn't. I'm getting this wrong now. Explain this to me. This is all confusing.
Yeah, Stoffel and Nick de Vries were Mercedes reserve drivers and testing drivers. But now obviously de Vries is off to AlphaTauri, and Stoffel van Dorn today was announced to go off to Aston Martin. So they don't have any reserve driver now or testing driver. So big on kept secret. It was rumored weeks ago that Ricciardo was going to go to Mercedes, and now you see Toto wearing his merch, and he did a Sky interview with Toto and Danny Rick on Sunday when Danny Rick was doing his driver of the day interview and stuff like that. So it looks like, I would say, to hedge your bets, that he's going to go to Mercedes in some form of capacity, but he's going to look to try and keep some other racing as well, because you're not going to get too much as a reserve driver there, really. Like, I've never seen Stoffel van Dorn race for or do any sort of free practice or anything like that for Mercedes since he was a reserve driver.
Yeah, I haven't seen, like, I know he's been, didn't he win Formula E?
Yeah, he was Formula E champion, but
yeah, but like his last time in F1 was not very memorable.
No, I can't remember when he was actually racing in Formula One. It was a good while ago.
5 or 6 years ago with Alonso.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't anything that really stood out. It was back in McLaren Honda days when it was a GP2 engine, as Alonso was saying. But ever since then, like, he won Formula E, and you can't really take that away from him. But everyone always says, like, it doesn't really. It's a look at a draw when you win Formula E. Like, Nick de Vries did it, but then the following year he was well down the pecking order in the actual championships, and he was in the exact same machinery. So it's more of a look of the draw. Obviously there is an element of skill in it and stuff like that, but it doesn't really hold as much water.
To be fair to Van Dorn, though, well, yeah, I don't really follow Formula E much, but I've heard similar kind of thoughts about Formula E in that regard. But Van Dorn had an absolutely incredible junior career, right up into F2 or GP2 as it was at the time. So I don't think there's anything lacking there. Again, it's circumstance too. He was Alonso's teammate in his first year, which isn't easy for anybody. And the McLaren Honda wasn't the best performing package. So again, he's any of them at that level are top drivers. But no, he's never sat foot into a Merc for any FPs or anything like that. Probably does a lot of simulator work, and I know De Vries did a lot of simulator work and was highly regarded there. So that's a big part of it too. And we know we'd seen that with what's his name, Danny Kvyat, who kind of was out of a drive with Red Bull and went and was highly sought after by Ferrari as a sim driver, because his sim driver and feedback and technical know-how was supposed to be excellent. So there is a offering there from these drivers for that. They don't have to be in the car. But I'm surprised to see Ricciardo take that option, because it's going to be, whatever about an up-and-coming driver traipsing all around the country, or the world rather, to, as someone said, drink coffee on race weekends. Ricciardo, it's going to be a big struggle for Ricciardo to be there as a, in the background, kind of knowing he's really not going to get a chance to drive the car. I think it's a, I don't know. I don't think it's a good move from him, to be honest. I think he should take his.
You didn't think he's overqualified for it or something? It's just seems a little bit odd or something. Maybe that's a bit unfair to say.
No, I think it's absolutely right. I think it is absolutely right. I think he is potentially overqualified for it, but then the critics would say, well, he's underqualified for keeping a race seat at the moment by his performances. So where else is he going to fall other than, I'd say really when it comes down to it, his choice is either the Mercedes test driver role, or not even, there's no test driving anymore, but the reserve driver role, or the Haas seat. And I'd have thought he'd take the Haas seat. It's better to be on the grid than looking in from the outside. It's better to be on the grid in a bad car than to be not on the grid but wearing a good car's team uniform in the pits. I don't see the point of that at all. I don't think there's a way back for him, to be honest, if he takes the Mercedes route.
Question, Liam, it's just come in here from Mike Dermody. Do the lads think Stoffel going to Aston Martin is the end of Mick Schumacher at Haas? Does Liam think that?
Yeah, I think Schumacher has been gone from Haas for a while. Like, they're a small team. Every dollar counts for them. How many times has he crashed this year? Like in Monaco, he split the car in two. He's ruined I don't know how many chassis at this stage. And I think for a team like that, getting someone a bit more reliable that's not going to bin it like after FP1 has finished and then putting it in the wall and ruining the chassis. Like, you need someone who's not going to do that. So I think he's been on the way out this while, and Steiner's never really won to pull any punches or anything like that. So the fact that he's not nailed down now at this stage, they've been in contract talks for ages there to start the season, and then they came to a halt. So they've obviously stopped and they've made up their mind that they don't want Schumacher. It could be a good bet to bring Hulkenberg back. They have, I think the reason that they got Schumacher in is because they have a German sponsor, and they want a German driver. So Hulkenberg could be a good banker for him, because he's solid. He's never going to do anything massive, because he's never gotten on the podium before. But he's not going to bin it as often as Schumacher does, really.
Do you want to comment on that, Barry?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be just as convinced that Schumacher isn't going to be there, but I think it definitely looks that way at the moment. It's probably 70-80% chance that he's not going to be there. Hulkenberg's an option. Hulkenberg again, another very, very good driver, done a lot of good stuff in his junior career, A1 Champ GP and stuff like that. It's just a little bit safe, I think, to take Hulkenberg back when there's so many, up and coming drivers. But he is a relatively safe pair of hands at the same time, and maybe that's what they need at the moment. But to be fair to Schumacher, and I wouldn't be as big a fan of his that our missing friend Richie is, but he's definitely, I was looking at it, he's been quicker than Magnussen the last few races, and we know he's a slow burner, and he kind of, in any other championship he's done, it's always been later in the season when it's come right. he is showing signs of that now towards the tail end of this season. So the question is, can he? If he was to stay, or I'm sure his selling point is that, look, lads, I'm on top of the car now. We've all that out of the way and behind us. This is I form in this regard. I am a slow starter, and when I get there, I'm pretty good. We've got that out of the way. Let's move on and move into 2023 with that momentum. I'd say that's his. That's his selling point at the moment. That's probably what he's trying to get across to Haas. And to be fair, it is probably true, but it might be too little, too late for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, because there's another question in: is it the end of Mick Schumacher and F1 altogether if he doesn't keep the seat this time? I mean, it's a difficult way back. Like,
I won't go back if he doesn't get in with Haas next year. That's it. I think there's too many other options out there. And look, he's not he's not any more entitled to a seat than anybody else. Just the name helps, the name hinders, but at the end of the day, he's got to perform. He's not going to get one just by legacy alone.
Mm-hmm. Well, for a change, we're going to talk about strategy, and it's not entirely Ferrari related. Although we did see a Plan C quite early on, but we've seen Plan E and all them plans earlier on in the year as well. But this time, there's a lot being spoken about in terms of Mercedes and their tyre strategy. Now, Liam, is it fair to say it's unlikely that it would have changed the outcome of the race, or do you think it would have played a big part?
I'd say it would have played a big part in it. Like Mercedes did look quick. If they had been on a better strategy, where they were doing similar softs and mediums with the Red Bulls, they could have gone a bit quicker. If George had done the same as what Danny Rick did, extended his mediums, then go on to softs, he probably would have caught Checo and then overtook him and then took the third place, and then the two of them would be on the podium. I like when you look at what Max was doing when he went on to the mediums after his soft sets, like he was doing 22s consistently. The only time since he put on the mediums to the end of the race that he didn't do a 22 was on the VSC for 2 laps. Everything else he was doing 22 2s to 22 6s. So the rest of them couldn't live with that because the hard tire only actually came alive 37 laps into its lifespan, and then it started to become quicker than the mediums. So from the get-go, they were at a massive deficit, so they were. So they could have been lived a lot better with them because they did look very quick. Like George Russell on his last qualifying lap, he pulled out of it and he was quicker. He had a personal best in the first sector, and I think he had a purple second sector, and then he bended it on the third sector. So he could have nearly been fighting for pole or a lot closer, which would have been a lot more of an interesting battle, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. A comment in saying Merck usually on point with strategy, they can't always get it right. A lot of talk about.
I don't know about that. To be fair, I mean, it's very. You see, you got to bear in mind. You got to go back when Merck showed up for the last number of years. Mercedes showed up to the track with a car driver combo that was markedly quicker than anything else. It's quite easy to not get the strategy right and still win the race when you've got a considerably faster car. So I'd say there was plenty of times that Mercedes maybe didn't get the right strategy, but they won in spite of that, not because of it. It just would have been masked a lot, because everybody looks at it and goes, "Oh, Mercedes won the race, therefore they did everything right." Not always true. The Mercedes might have won the race in spite of making mistakes, just such as their advantage in pace. We've seen that with Red Bull recently. They made a mess of a pit stop, 11 seconds down, bang, they still win the race. Doesn't mean the pit stop error didn't happen. You got to look at things a little bit more in depth than just the overall result of it. And to the Mercedes point this weekend, I totally understand why they left Hamilton on the strategy was. There's no point in doing the same thing as Red Bull and starting on a soft and moving to a medium, because the Red Bull is a quicker car. If you do the same as what they're doing, they're going to beat you. So there's no point in doing the same. So I can understand why they went the other way with Hamilton. They had to try something different to beat Verstappen. I think the real thing they made a mistake on was not trying the extend the mediums and put the softs on for Russell, because they literally, figuratively and accurately had nothing to lose. Russell was going to finish fourth. if they put 3 wheels on that car. Never mind whether they were soft or hard. That's where he was locked into his 4th position. So that was a mistake. Hamilton, in retrospect, might have been a mistake, but you can't judge them in retrospect. You only judge them in what they did at the time. So what Hamilton's move was right, but I think they definitely left something on the table with Russell. Just give it just to try it. If nothing else, he was into for, and like they kind of did, because they put him in the last lap and put him on softs anyway to get the fastest lap. So that was their mistake there, I think.
Mm-hmm. I was just smiling and smirking there because Shane was in touch and he goes, "I meant this year, Barry." Was it Shane or Keith actually that was dressed up as a Joker? That was class.
Oh, Keith, yeah.
Lad,
Party, yeah.
it was absolutely class.
He put a bit of effort into it, yeah.
Jeez, you did, yeah. I didn't have the volume on the thing that was shared, but I'm guessing it was Rock and Roll Part 2 and the whole thing, but it looked class.
It was.
Deadly first one. So I'll give him a shout out, and a shout out to Rapco again and to PFT Travel. All right, lads. Sure, look, we might as well go at the elephant in the room, and this is, I suppose, after occurring just before race started, and it's the decision of Red Bull, Max Verstappen, Horner, Red Bull, to not speak to Sky Sports after comments made by Ted Kravitz on Ted's notebook last week. So I just want to get the comments that they're aggrieved over first, just to make sure we're factually and politically correct. Basically, Hamilton doesn't win a race all year, and then finally comes back to the track where he could win the first race all year, battling the same guy who won the race he was robbed in the previous year and manages to finish ahead of him. What a script and a story that would have been. But that's not the way the script turned out today, was it? Because the guy that beat him after being robbed actually overtook him, because he's got a quicker car, because of engineering and Formula One and design, and pretty much because, well, yeah, it's not in the co-op, but Adrian Newey, Red Bull's lead car designer over there. That's what he said after Austin. So based on that, the decision was made not to speak to Sky Sports. So the first thing I'll do is I'll ask you, Liam, did Red Bull do the right thing? Is it fair to add in here that Ted Kravitz didn't actually mention the rob by Max Verstappen? Or where do you see this whole thing in general? Because there is a broader point which we get onto, but in this particular example.
Yeah, I think so. Like it's kind of feeding the flames, as it were. Like if you go anywhere online and talk about Formula One, it's all so polarizing. Like you can even see Ted Kravitz, after those comments that he's made, his Instagram is just getting plagued with people abusing him, and comments like this and dragging them or beating a dead horse, basically something that has done, it's over, it's finished. Michael Massey was sacked, we're moving on, we're on to the next year, but they're still bringing it back up, they're still making comments, they're still making jabs at Max and undermining his championship from last year, and it's just feeding the flames and it's keeping things going. And like, you know, these are elite athletes, and they're not immune to what goes on outside and what happens online. Like the Hamilton was booed massively there in Brazil, but Max was booed in Austin last year, or last week even, and like, that has to play on their minds like somewhat, you would imagine. Like, and Sky Sports everyone has made comments, everyone talks about it, the constant bias towards Mercedes and Hamilton, and the constant bashing of Max. Like, I'd say they are within their right to do what they did. Like, they've come out and said that they're going to talk to them at their next race, so it only lasted one weekend, which, you know, why wouldn't you carry it on if you're going to keep going? But yeah, like, Christian Horner is always very open with Sky. He's always there for interviews. He's always on the pit wall talking to them. He loves being in front of the cameras as much as the presenters do as well. So to go at them like that, they're constantly at them. Like, I don't blame them for pulling the plug on it.
Barry?
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to seen him maybe handle it slightly different. I would like to see him call him on it, you know, to in an interview, as opposed to just kind of not talking to you. But I don't blame them for taking the route they did. There's been a few bits on. I think that, yeah, you know, as Liam says, it's so polarizing and it's so kind of, you know, kind of parochial almost the way it's going at the moment, and I don't like that. I think it's, I to be perfectly honest, I think it's like a dumbing down of the sport, and you know, you need to respect everyone, all of them, all the cars, all the drivers, all the team members. You can cheer for one, that's all right, but you know, what's it? Someone said extinguishing someone else's candle doesn't make yours burn brighter. Like, just take the lads. You support that team. That's grand. Support that team. You don't have to absolutely hound anyone who likes another team or another color card. It's just so ridiculous. It's just stupid. But anyway, that's the way that the sport has gone. Right. Whether you like it or not, unfortunately, and the fan base has gone. But when you think back on it, I've made myself think about it and look back through a few things. There's always been the Hamilton bias, which is understandable. At the end of the day, it's his countryman. That's they're from the UK. It's a UK production. He's a UK driver. Everything else. But it's gone. I mean, if you remember back to it, went back as far as Vettel. There was always this kind of anti-Vettel thing going on in the early 2000s and 10s, 11s, 12s when he was winning his championships. There was certainly a bit for Alonso. There was, even go back to Schumacher's time, if you like, which is before Sky Sports. He was, not exactly similar sort of stuff, I suppose, And then even when Nico Rosberg won against Hamilton in the Mercedes, there was one of the BBC journalists, a respected journalist, was basically, Rosberg won, but here's why Hamilton didn't. And it basically went into say that, Rosberg, our reigning Formula One world champion, isn't as good a driver as Hamilton. He's just been lucky and Hamilton's been unlucky. They're like, this is hours after he won a champion. It's just so, when you actually start looking at it with a different set of eyes, maybe, that I had of previously, it's hard to not see it. And there's definitely something there, whether it be deliberate or not, I don't know. And it could be just a bit of, patriotism, jingoism, whatever you want to call it. But it should be better than that. It's the role of a commentator is to yes, add a bit of colour. A little bit of personal opinion isn't bad. It's not, we don't want zombies just iterating out PR press releases and all this sort of stuff. But what Ted said in the notebook after Austin was in itself not the worst thing in the world, but it was probably a bit of the straw that broke the camel's back. That just kind of brought it over the edge. And the irony of it is that by Red Bull choosing not to speak to Sky Sports, it's probably kind of blown up more for them now, if anything. But they're kind of damned if they do and damned if they don't in that respect. And it's sad to see, people turning on Ted Kravitz, who I actually have a lot of time for. I think he brings a lot of interesting qualities to the sport, and he's kind of likable sort of chap to watch. He has his opinions, that's fine. But no one likes to see these sort of death threats and all that absolute rubbish that's going towards him at the moment. That's just beyond the pale, no matter what way you look at it. Yeah,
no, that's completely out of order, and that is all too common nowadays. Unfortunately, we don't want to see that. We just want to debate the whole thing, I suppose, in a civilized way and have a look
play the
at
ball, not the man, isn't it? That's the thing. You can sit there and give out about the Massey and the FIA and all the rest of it, but it's not Red Bull's fault. It wasn't Verstappen's fault at the end of the day. That's where the line needs to be drawn. There's been, every other championship that's been won through the course of F1 history probably has somebody somewhere saying, Jesus, I don't know about their engine, or I don't know, like, there's been loads of it. Mercedes themselves, built an extra engine for Brazil last year, flouted the rules and took the penalty so that they'd have a very, very fast engine for the Brazilian race. That's breaking the rules, so to speak. But, is that rule, not as important as the other rule? Like, who gets to decide that? They're all at it. Let's be honest. They're all going to push it to the absolute limit. And if an opportunity presents themselves, they're going to take it. Every one of them, Hamilton, Alonso, you name it. Every one of the drivers on that grid will take it when it presents to themselves, to them. But it's not their fault in most cases.
Yeah, actually, I know we're going off topic a little bit, but it was also a juicy one. Alonso's comments about Hamilton's world titles. He won. We know he won 7. And I need to get the exact quote from Alonso, which I don't have to hand. But basically, he was kind of discounting a few of those on the basis that he was only competing with his teammate because his car was so good. That's a big,
I think to paraphrase, it was basically Verstappen's mean more than Alonso was to say, and I'm paraphrasing, Verstappen's titles mean more because he had to beat other people in other cars, not just his teammate. in the same car, or words to something. That's the effect he was getting across, and like he's not wrong. Like he's not. At the end of the day, he's not. Now the problem with Alonso is that he was Hamilton's. And did you see the tweet that Hamilton put up, which is just a
with the
picture of
podium.
him on the
him
podium ahead of Alonso? But that's grand. It's just like these guys are not machines. They're just they're 30. Well, I was going to say 30 odd year olds, 40 in Alonso's case. Just ribbing each other and get like, sure, what harm? Like, it's fine. It doesn't have to be factually 100% correct, about it. And yeah, someone's going to find something that happened 10 years ago, or someone said something 10 years ago that doesn't match up with what they're saying now. But it's it's probably, there probably is an element of truth in it. Like, at the end of the day, Verstappen won the championship for Red Bull last year, and Red Bull won the championship for Verstappen this year. Insofar as the car that Verstappen has this year is faster and better in general than his competitors, and that's helped him to win the championship this year. Verstappen's driving and just doggedness last year won the championship for him over a more superior Mercedes car. That's the way it goes. It's there's so yeah, Alonso's right. He probably Alonso doesn't say anything. He probably does have for a bit of a reaction sometimes, and he gets it, and we all talk about him, and but sure, why not? As I said, we got to bear in mind, but not that long ago we were all going on about F1 drivers being robots and not saying anything, and they having no personality, and they don't open their mouth. And now we have a situation where every time one of them opens their mouth, there's a gazillion people on Twitter fact checking them and going back to say, well, in 2006 on the 14 minutes past, you said this. Like, so they're just going to revert back to just saying nothing again if we keep pulling everything they say apart. Like,
anything on any of that, Liam? Because I know there was an awful line there.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you as well. Like, Alonso does like the sound of his own voice a little bit. He does like to be in the headlines and stuff like that. But he's not really wrong. Bottas, when he came on the scene after Rosberg retired, he was never really at the races. Like, sometimes some years he didn't even finish second in the championship. Like, when he's like, Hamilton is so far ahead with his car. So, like, Hamilton ran away with it because they were so dominant. Max is doing it at the tail end of this season because Ferrari should be up there, but for whatever reason they're well off the pace now. And as you said, like, Red Bull supplied it this year. They supplied the car, and Max is running away with it. Everyone got bored watching Hamilton win. I didn't watch a lot of Formula One when Hamilton was in his dominance, because you turn it on and no one would change places. Where you started in qualifying was where you finish, and it's still a great achievement by Lewis. Like, not to take anything away from him, but it's not as impressive really when they're so dominant. Like, there was an element in Mercedes when they were so dominant as to how to not make people hate them as much in their marketing meetings, because they were so dominant, to try and offset that a little bit, because that's how much they were winning. Like, where they had to consciously try and make them more likable, because people were starting to hate them so much.
I'm going to bring it back then to this whole thing about the so-called bias and all, and try bring another bit of flavour to it. So obviously Richie threw up a tweet there a couple of nights ago in relation to the so-called bias or whatever, and he said that he thought Max should have called Sky Sports out as well instead of the silence. And then I prompted a bit of debate underneath it. I wanted to kind of individualize it a little bit and maybe put a disclaimer that I personally wouldn't have much of a problem with the way Brundle carries, I suppose, his opinions and all. I think he's very straight, Button to a lesser extent. And then Conor Murphy came in and mentioned Paul di Resta, who I'd probably put in there a little bit as well now, not to the same extent as the other two. And I'll get your thoughts on that in a moment. But our friends over at the First Corner F1 podcast said that I think every English-speaking territory should get its own commentators and pundits, like in the 90s and 90s, like when RT had theirs. You should see how passionate the French, Dutch, Spanish, Italians get, but Sky UK just get accused of bias. I think it's very natural, petulant of Red Bull, in my opinion. Now, the thing I just want to add to that is, in contrast to going back an era or two, Sky are the content kind of provider, we'll say, for the F1 feed as well, which goes out to America now. So Is there an element that while this is going out, obviously on Sky UK, are they slightly forgetful that it is actually a world feed as well? And do they get maybe drawn into that? And is that why we see this, I say, quote unquote, bias? Do you think that's a factor, lads? And whichever he wants to take it up there, belt away.
Yeah, I think it is definitely a factor. I mean, I don't know Liam, what your thoughts on it, but it is a factor. How deliberate or not it is a different one.
What do you think,
Yeah,
Mo?
yeah. I would think like they're always going to cheer for their own lads. Like you're not going to watch the rugby at the weekend and cheer for South Africa. Like you're going to cheer for Ireland. So there is an element of that, but they have to be conscious that this does go out everywhere. Like there's no bias in ESPN for Haas being the American team because it's the Sky feed. They don't really talk about them. They just focus on their lads, the Lando Norrises, the to a lesser extent, and the Lewis Hamiltons. So I like uh, what they're feeding into and what they're kind of doing. I think there has to be an element of they have to realize that there's other people listening than just the people in the UK, the English, like that want to just hear about Lewis Hamilton and stuff like that. So yeah, like it enrages you sometimes when you're just sitting there and you're tuning in and Mercedes been well off the pace all year, and they're talking about is this the weekend that Mercedes are finally going to get their win, and then Lewis Hamilton doesn't get out of Q2 or something. It's always just driving the same thing, the point that's not really there to be driven for most of the season.
Yeah, there is a kind of maybe it's subconscious with Crofty, maybe it's not, but you can hear in his voice when he's talking about Hamilton that bit more, and Russell as well, to be honest with you. But maybe not to the same extent. Just if he's doing a lap or whatever, there's just that little bit more, I think, more often than what you would hear in terms of excitement with other drivers up around the top end. That's something I definitely would notice personally. But what do you think about the other guys that I've mentioned there? I think that's where a lot of people are maybe falling down a bit. It is unfair to just say everyone on Sky F1's coverage is like this because there is so much of them there. And what do you think? Like, I think Brundle's fantastic, lads.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Brundle. Like even his earlier stuff where he was always going out and driving the cars and the insight that he'd bring. And the same with Button, like for the likes of myself and yourself that has never raced cars and listening to Brundle and Jensen talking about how they're doing stuff, how they can see the lads fighting the wheels, the steering wheel, and trying to get traction and what they should be doing here and there and everywhere. They're a lot more interesting to listen to than Crofty just shouting over everyone. But even like Brundle, I think Jensen and Brundle are a lot more less bias on them as well. Like there at the weekend in the build up, they were talking about the Red Bull breaching the budget cap and how
It was
that's
budget crap, you're right.
Yeah, budget crap. £300,000 over, and they were trying to label it. That's why Max Verstappen won 2 world championships, is because they overspent by 300,000. And Brundle was there and called them straight out, and it's like, you can't say that. You can't say something like that. There's no way that you can buy 2 world championships for just £300,000. He's the only
Yeah.
one that is always there, that is just
But
talking about everyone else.
Is that, sorry, Liam, to interrupt you slightly. Is that not a Brundle? I think the drivers obviously bring a big, like you said, behind the scenes kind of expertise to it. To like you said, lads who haven't drove cars before. But I think beyond that, what they do is they bring a kind of a practicality, a pragmatism of it, I suppose, more than anything else. That they know that you'd like to David Croft and commentators. Got to bear in mind that their role is to add color and spruce it up, and yes, to be shouty and all of these things to which is kind of what Murray Walker did. He was enthusiastic. He was the best of them, obviously, but it's the same sort of thing. They need to twist the dial. They need to turn the dial and get make something that's not exciting. And that's where I think where the drivers come in from the other side and go, like I said earlier, look, Ricciardo doesn't just remember how to drive. Let's calm down. To kind of offset that kind of, shoutiness with a little bit of pragmatism, with a little bit of, well, in reality, lads, what actually happens is and I think that's why the drivers' punditry is sometimes a little bit more balanced, because it's not as gung ho and kind of peaks and valleys as sometimes the commentator, the main commentators, kind of the color commentators, I call them, to try to go for. They're all into a big, like, oh, Hamilton's after doing this, or Norris is after doing that because he's so brave, and he's a gladiator, and Button's looking at it going, well, no, his tire temperature is just came in better because a mechanic put an extra 2 degrees of camber onto the car that they realized they need. It's not as exciting, but it's probably what happened. As opposed to this, like, he's just amazing, and he's just after deciding to go 2 seconds a lap quicker because he had his, Weetabix this morning or something, like, so that's the reality of it. And it's not as interesting, unfortunately, as, the kind of the hero driver type element, but that is generally speaking what happens in it. And that's where I prefer to, I would disagree on the rest of the thing. I think the rest of it is just too flat. I don't think he says anything. He says he doesn't criticize anyone. He doesn't big up anybody on the other side. I think he's just a little bit too cautious, maybe,
That's because he's trying to get back in
delivery. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that boat has definitely sailed at this stage. But he is a little bit just bland for me. But it kind of shows the point. It is this fine line that they have to walk between being bland and being, getting the grief that Kravitz is getting. It's a small envelope they have to operate in. And to be fair, it's live TV, going out to millions of people. And, in Kravitz's defense, he's, doing that kind of notebook thing. It's got to be difficult, walking around trying to find something to talk about, live and in the moment. Doesn't excuse it, but might be a little bit behind where maybe his mouth just got a little bit ahead of his brain on that one.
In fairness, all season Ted hasn't been too bad. That's probably the most he's ever said about last year and stuff like that. He's always kind of brushed past it and gotten on with it. So I've always liked listening to him and watching him afterwards, because he was the least insufferable of them all, really.
Yeah.
How I lame of it.
Yeah.
You see, and just to pick up on something that you said, Barry, like, I think if you hear Crofty putting the same excitement and colour into every driver, like what Murray Walker used to, for most part, I thought, like, the only real standout for Murray Walker was, and understandably so, when Damon Hill won the World Championship, and I think it got a lump in my throat. That's,
that's fine.
Fair.
Yeah.
There's connection there. But I can recall so many things where, and it's feeling it, and it's Senna, and it's Prost, and it's done with the same vigor and excitement. But I don't see that consistently enough with every driver, in my opinion. That's just my opinion, with Crofty. That's where I take issue a little bit. I just think it's
probably one of those
with certain drivers.
It's probably one of those things that you gotta. What was it someone said to me a while ago? Normally the saying is you gotta see it to believe it, which is the typical saying. But if you turn that saying on its head, you gotta believe it to see it. Sometimes if you believe something, you'll see it as a result.
Exactly.
And I think it's like your story. You buy a silver car, every car is silver. Like if you, for whatever reason, if you've got that in your head, you're probably going to see it more and more and more and pick up on things. Some of them rightly, maybe some of them not so rightly. And it's that the problem with that is it's a bit of a snowball then at that stage, because then they can't open their mouth without people going, oh, that's what he meant there, or oh, he didn't mean this here. To be honest, personally, the kind of Crofty and stuff, that type of commentary generally washes over me, because I think it's performance. I think that is their role. It's performance, it's theatre, it's make it exciting, shout and roar and do all this sort of stuff. The stuff I really have an ear for is more just the expertise, the technicals, that sort of stuff, because there's a bit of theatrical license with the other stuff that I'd always kind of give the Crofties and whatever of this world, because at the end of the day, that is their job, to shout and roar and make it exciting. Nobody wants, like, that's why James Hunt and Murray Walker work so well, or Brundle and Crofty. It's the yin and the yang, and two Brundles wouldn't be the same as one of each. No, exactly. Yeah. It needs to
but
work
it's no
together.
Different in any sport, though. Like, that's the wholly all of it. And sometimes when you see, and this has never happened that I can recall anywhere, no clear example. If Crofty was trying to do Brundle's role and Brundle was trying to do Crofty's role, It doesn't work. I've seen it in radio. I've seen very, very good analysts that might be with me at a GA game, let's say. And maybe one day they're turning into be a main commentator. It's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Completely different thing.
And you might be able to answer this one for me. Well, me, that's pretty one-dimensional in the sports that I follow. But is there another sport that has such worldwide exposure coupled with a consistent two-person? I know there's others that come and go, but generally speaking, a sport with that sort of worldwide exposure, with that amount of events in a year, with the same two commentators talking about the same 20 protagonists. I can't think of a sport where that would happen. You know what I mean? Like if you if you think of soccer, in the UK, you've got the UK Championship, the other championships. I don't know any of them, but
the other football.
There's like was it Serie A or something in Italy and all the Bundesliga, whatever they call them, right? They've all these other and even they're all independent of each other. They'd all then have different matches with different. They're not playing the same people match in, match out. To my ear, they don't have the same commentary teams time in. They have a bigger spread of commentary, and that's only nationally. So imagine a World Cup type setup where you have the same 20 teams playing each other and somehow or other every second week for the entire year with the same two commentators talking on it. You're going to find problems with that sheer volume and quantity of airtime. And so I don't think it's a Formula One problem. I think it's literally no other sport has those set of circumstances to be compared to. And if they did, maybe we would just go, oh yeah, sure, that's normal. Sure, that happened in the tennis last week or the golf next week or whatever. So I think that needs to be taken into account as well, as opposed to just the whole, throwing labels at people and stuff.
Yeah, maybe so. I'll take your point. The one thing I suppose I would add to that is it is really, I suppose, dependent on who the parent are and maybe how good they are. And that's a generally speaking thing. It's nothing to do with this particular example. But it's a very good point that I never thought about on a world scale. It's something maybe that you might see in Ireland when it comes to maybe a local level when there's football matches on and maybe they're just doing one at the weekend or something like that. I don't mean on TV. I mean local radio now as such. It will be, it can be common enough, but definitely not an international one. It's a very good point. Never really thought of that, I suppose. So
the other side to think of it too is like but the big difference is like you go back. I'm just sitting here. There's a Senna poster in my room. He's look the movie poster looking back at me. He's just prompted me to think of something. Every time Senna won a race in the Brazilian commentary, they played a particular type of music as he crossed the line, which was 30, 40 seconds, very kind of emotional, let's go lad sort of type music. So this isn't, that's pretty unbiased. Let's be honest. Full orchestra music banging out like as soon as sent across the line. So they were biased. I think the difference there, though, as you said earlier, was that was a Brazilian winning with Brazilian commentators exclusively for a Brazilian audience. I think the Sky thing is the fact that the world feed is or the English speaking feed rather is where it maybe falls down. But again, it's a numbers thing, it's the whole world is criticizing them as opposed to just Spanish speakers or whatever it might be.
A few comments that have come in, lads. Mike has said Croft and Kravitz have been quite biased towards Hamilton for some time. Gasly got points on the license for track limits in Austin and is very close to missing the race if he's not careful. Was Hamilton also guilty of track limits? Didn't get a point on the license. Sky also wouldn't let the Red Bull breach drop yet. Never really mentioned Aston Martin, who also breached rules. Yeah.
What was that about? Hamilton got. What was it? Sorry, you said Gasly got the point.
Gasly got points on license for track limits in Austin and is very close to missing the race if he's not careful. Was Hamilton also guilty of track limits? Didn't get a point on license.
Well, now I don't know the answer to this. Maybe Mike could reply in. What was Hamilton's issue with the track limit? Was that in the race? I don't recall that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just didn't. I might have missed it.
I think towards the end of the race, Lewis Hamilton he got a flag just as a warning for track limits.
I think the difference there is that in Gasly's case, he forced another driver off the circuit, as opposed to track limits, whereas Hamilton did the track limits on his own. That's probably the differentiator there, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Lads, I think I'm just going to go back to the run order that we have in place. I think we're after covering a good bit, in fairness, in terms of what we had laid out to cover. Literally one of the topics was shit race, which is aptly put. In fairness, another thing we should have pointed out as well was Checo telling the fans not to boo Hamilton. Which, you know, was a nice thing to see him do.
Noticed that, yeah.
You know,
Yeah, there was actually another video that I seen there today that just surfaced of the Red Bull mechanics hanging out over the pit wall, cheering Max on, and then Lewis coming in and them applauding him as he comes in, and then Checo comes in, they cheer for him. So they're actually showing that bit of respect to the other teams, the other drivers as well, which is good to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's probably always been the case.
Yeah.
And is generally speaking, it's the F1 Twitter world or Instagram world. I think we're kind of, oh, look at that's happening. Where it's, you know, it's not actually new. That's probably been happening all the time. It's just, it's more insightful that it's more of a interesting that people thought it was unusual when it really isn't. It was unusual to have that footage for sure.
Yeah,
but I think that's pretty typical. But again, it's that split between what's happening actually between the drivers and the teams and what the fandom out there thinks about it. Yeah, it's a pity that the fans can't treat each other with the respect that the drivers and the teams do to each other. That's the real sadness of it.
Yeah, 100%. Just lastly, just when you were talking about the respect between the teams and stuff, we shared a couple of videos, as we tend to do, over on our Instagram page. Last week would have been 25 years since Villeneuve actually won the championship, and that mad weekend with himself, Frentzen, and Schumacher all setting the very same time, which was crazy. He did say afterwards in an interview, someone has the result of the next stage. And I don't know, do you know that? I didn't do any reading up after to see who.
I'd heard that it was to the, I think it was to the 100 then, and it's to the 1,000 now. So I think there was one other decimal point somewhere that would split them.
We'll see is that there. But the point, anyhow, which I was actually heading towards, was him driving back for the pits after the race and all the teams clapping, you know. I thought that was very, very cool moment. So, yeah, that's it, gents. Look, sure, we'll leave it at that. We're back in a couple of weeks' time. We'll have a look back on Brazil. We also have an interview with Matt Gamby, who was very much involved in making a deal happen with Haas this year. So it's interesting to see things from that point of view. We'll probably throw that out there next week. We spoke to Matt there a couple of weeks back. We are, of course, as we said, on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter at Irish F1 Show is our handle. You can check us out there. We have a Buy Me a Coffee link as well. If you're liking the coverage, you can support our efforts for the price of a coffee. And a big shout out to Rapco and PFT Travel, our kind sponsors. Liam Murray, Barry Rabbit, thanks a million, lads. Really enjoyed this evening. Hope you did as well. And should chat to us again soon. All the best.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers. Thanks.